Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new Doctor Who video where today I'm going to be talking all about, and I've got a whole lot of thoughts to say about, the Vanquishers. So yes, before we get started guys, please hit that like button, and if you're new here, please subscribe. We get loads of subscribers recently, which has been really great, so please also, if you are new here and this is the first video you've checked out, there's loads of heckin' stuff on my channel to check out: reviews, reactions, discussion, the whole lot. So if you are new here, please hit that subscribe button. So, the Vanquishers. Firstly, I'm sorry that it's been a couple of days in the making this video. I just haven't really had time, got round to it, had the motivation to make this video since the episode aired a couple of days ago. Yeah, well, you can see from the title that my opinion unfortunately wasn't as positive as I would have liked. And I want to start by saying, and hopefully if you've stuck around for a long time, or even just for this series, you'll have seen that generally I've been pretty positive about the series. Like, fundamentally, every episode up to this point I have enjoyed to at least a reasonable amount. You know, it's been a mixed bag to an extent. Probably War of the Centaurans and Village of the Angels are probably the high points, with Halloween Apocalypse, you know, it's a lot of setup. Maybe Survivors of the Flux isn't quite that great, and Once Upon a Time sort of sitting there somewhere. But then we got the Vanquishers, and when I watched it the first time, and I've just watched it again recently, because I wanted to be able to watch it twice to give a full and, you know, clearer opinion on this story and this episode, and I just can't help but feel it's a bit of a letdown, a bit of a disappointment. You know, since watching it, I've read lots of different people's opinions, perspectives on it, discussion about it. I would highly recommend checking out Andrew Ellard on Twitter, who does these tweet notes. He's a sort of script writer, basically, I think on CBBC at the moment. I think he does Wizards vs. Aliens, something like that. And he always gives fascinating sort of notes on the episodes. He does it for each episode of the series, of all Doctor Who for ages, and it's just fascinating to get his perspective as sort of from a writer's perspective of the reasons things are done, you know, because he can see the reason that it was written in that way and why that was done, and some of the shortcuts that were taken, and all these different things. And I just really feel like it's a really fascinating point to start with. So what went wrong with the Vanquishers for me? Well, it feels like a lot happens. Like, it feels like we are running at 100 miles an hour from frame one to the end of this episode. It doesn't really drop the pace at all. There's a couple of slightly slower moments where I think Azure gets quite a long, waffly speech trying to explain the whole reason that they're doing what they're doing, which is just a bit heckin' confusing. This whole war between space and time, and they want to release time, and then suddenly time is a sentient being, or... You know, I'll try and come on that a bit more later, but something of that ilk. That's one of the few points it gets a bit slower, and I guess the very end of the story to some extent. But it just feels like we're going non-stop. Like, I had to watch it twice to even be able to really comprehend half of what have happened in the episode. Like, from the start, from the off, when, you know, you got the sort of recap, and then it flows straight into the resolution of the cliffhanger, which, as seems to be becoming a tradition with Chris Chibnall, is pretty bang average. Like, to an extent, I don't mind the way that Yaz, Dan, Jericho and Williamson get out of their little predicament with the whole opening one of the doors, which is the Endless Death Door, which sort of zaps all the Centaurans to the dead. Like, that, you know, sure, you set it up last week, you said, oh look, there's an Endless Death Door, that could be important, hint, 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 and then you use it. And sure, it's fine, it works, it's quick, it's cheap, it's easy, it works. But I just thought it was a bit nonsensical that the resolution to the Doctor about to be killed by Swarm with a touch is just her stepping out of the way. That's actually all she does. She just steps away. And I'm like, if you're going to set this up as a big cliffhanger, sure, I know you can't kill the Doctor. I get that you can't kill the Doctor, obviously. But it just felt so hecking cheap for her to set up that threat and then her just step away from it. And literally, that was it. Yeah, I just found that bizarre. And I feel like that's kind of where a lot of this episode falls down, for me at least. Because so much of it is taking shortcuts. Like... fundamentally, the majority of things that happen in this series are wrapped up in this episode. Like, it's not like we are really, particularly left with a million open questions, like, oh, all these loose plot threads and whatever. Fundamentally, a lot of the story, most of the characters, the plot's all wrapped up. Just, it's done very quickly, cheaply in places, in a not very satisfying way. It sort of does the job that it has to do, but not in a particularly fun and satisfying way. You know, there's a bit of excitement, I guess, because there's constant action. It's like action, action, action. It's not like, say, Chibnall's first finale, the Battle of Ranskorav Kolos, which is one of the worst things about it, is it feels nothing like a finale and it feels really boring. I think that's one of the biggest flaws you can give against it, is it's just really dull and really slow and doesn't feel like a finale at all. Like, this feels like a finale. It's got, as I say, that high-paced action-adventure sort of style to it. You've got the big new threat of the Centaurans. You've got the sort of end of the world, end of the universe moment going on there, and then the Doctor coming in and saving the day in 3 forms in this story. Like, it's all there. It just doesn't feel like a satisfying watch. Now, obviously, we have to talk about all the, what I think I've seen fans calling the fob watch baiting, which it's really tricky to know how I feel about this, what I want them to do with this, where it should actually go, because I just don't really know. Like, if the Doctor opens the fob watch, all it's basically doing is let's fill in the missing page on TARDIS Wiki of the Doctor's backstory. Like, what else is it actually adding to the show or achieving by seeing a quick, probably 5 minutes of flashbacks and cuts between, maybe probably the Ruth Doctor or Jodie's Doctor filling in the role of the past Doctor in various scenes over a very, very quick period of time, because you're never going to dedicate loads of time to it. It's frustrating. It is, when you watch the episode. As an audience, it's what you want. Well, certainly for me, and I guess as the audience, is what you want to see. Is because they keep baiting it, because they keep, telling you it's important, telling you it's what the Doctor wants. It's therefore what you want. It's what you want to see as an audience. We want the Doctor to get her memory back. So we want to see what happened in the past, because we're fans and we want to know these things that happened. But then, as we've said before, the whole reason for the Timeless Child and her not knowing these memories was to create more mystery around the character. And if they forgive all her memories back with a little flashback sequence or whatever, then that invalidates that. So it's almost like we've reached this point, which I guess to an extent we were inevitably always going to, where you either have to just commit and give the memories back and end the arc completely, and just sort of say, we've explored that fun bit and now we're back to the status quo. We know all the Doctor's backstory, whatever. Or we leave it open forever and the Doctor's just got to accept it. And we come back to what in the Timeless Children, the Ruth Doctor's trying to tell her, do you need to be defined by who you were in the past? No, defined by who you are now, blah, blah, blah. Basically saying you shouldn't care about the past. And I guess we kind of see that at the end of this episode when the Doctor decides against, at least at the moment, opening the fob watch. Like, I fundamentally don't think that plotline's dead there. The fact that they make a point, the whole last line of the whole series is, she's dropped the fob watch in, she said, don't let me have it, find it, unless I ask really hard, or like unless I want it really, I want it too much or something. And that is the last line that comes in just before the sting at the end of the episode. So surely that's going to be picked up on again in the specials. Like, I think it would make narrative sense for it to kind of tie back into an ultimate reckoning with the Master. Obviously, the Master is going to turn up again. We kind of knew it from set photos anyway, some leaks and stuff. But clearly, this line of dialogue in the episode, it's obvious. It's we're doing the Ood from End of Time all over again. Or not End of Time, which I know from Planet the Ood, I guess initially, wasn't it? And then there was a few other hints, that mysterious woman in Planet of the Dead, and all this. Your song is coming to an end, and blah blah blah. He will knock 4 times, hinting at the Master's return. We're getting that all over again, rehashing David Tennant episodes, as Chris Chibnall seems to love to do at points. But like, I feel like it would make the most narrative sense for the final reckoning in the final episode, the Doctor and the Master together. He's the guy who kind of set off this whole storyline about the Timeless Child, basically, when revealing that the stuff isn't everything you think you know is a lie. That was a cringe line, wasn't it? Or setting that all into motion, it would surely make sense for the final reckoning for her to probably, I guess, open the fob watch or learn her some of her memories or something. Her reaching that acceptance and that conclusion has surely got to happen in the final episode with the Master there. Because obviously this is not going to carry on into the RTD era. Like, that's fairly fundamental, that everything to do with the Timeless Child, the Doctor's past, the Division, all of that stuff is going to end with Jodie Whittaker and with Chris Chibnall. Maybe Russell, if he really wants to, or a future showrunner could then pick it up again, but it's going to be left at a conclusion point. And I just don't believe, based on what we've seen of the Doctor in this series, that she's actually going to be able to leave the fob watch and not think about it again. Like, after the Ruth Doctor told her, and we thought she'd come to that conclusion at the end of Series 12, we get to Flux, Series 13, and she decides, actually, no, I can't deal with it. I need to find out more about my past. I need to learn all about it. We've had a few hints and tips. We've had a load of it in Once Upon a Time, a few hints at it. But we're still kind of, I don't see how she can just be satisfied. Like, sure, therefore she should have opened the watch. But I guess she was fighting against that feeling because of what she's been told in the past and what she feels like she shouldn't need to know that. She shouldn't need to be defined and live by what she did in the past. That she wants to, you know, focus on the future and go forward, and that doesn't need to come back to her. But I just don't see that she's going to leave it. So it's going to be picked up. And I just don't know how you kind of wrap that up in a satisfying way, apart from a 5-minute flashback exposition scene filling in the TARDIS wiki page. In terms of things I liked about this story, because there were some things I liked about this episode, like I fundamentally enjoyed the sort of Centauran threat plotline, the idea they had of kind of luring the Daleks and Cybermen into a trap to destroy them all and then become the conquering beings. Like, the Centaurans don't really have any long-term plans. They don't really have anything above just wanting to go to war and win and rule the universe through defeating everybody at war. Like, they have no plan of where they want to be at when they've done it. Like, sure, we've defeated all the Daleks and the Cybermen. Cool, we're ruling the universe. Now what? We just sit and wait till the universe ends or something? Like, that's it. They don't have any long-term plan. And, you know, we get all this fairly comedic stuff. I mean, the Centaurans have always, to some extent, been a little bit comedic and a bit silly. Certainly you see it in stories like The Invasion of Time, running around in the TARDIS, tripping over, you know, beach chairs next to a swimming pool and stuff. Like, the Centaurans are fundamentally meant to be a slightly comedic villain, but also like a threat, but also just with a bit of comedy played in there as well. And I think we see that, obviously, all this stuff with the chocolate and, you know, the Centaurans desperate to eating all this chocolate and stuff, which was a bit bizarre and a bit confusing and a bit in an episode that needed to wrap up a hecking lot of stuff and was full of stuff. It didn't feel like it was worth wasting those 3 or 4 minutes we got of the Doctor going to a corner shop and talking to a Centauran about chocolate. I mean, I guess it was then setting up a way to get Jericho and Claire to go up to Centauran Psychic Command so they could find out where the Final Flux event would be. So, like, it's where, like, this episode does do a lot of good stuff because everything ties into everything. As I say, just that example there, Centauran eating chocolate in a corner shop ultimately ties into where they find out where the Final Flux event is going to be, which means they can then bring the Daleks and Cybermen there, which means then they can destroy them with the Flux, which means the Doctor then turn up and change that, and then destroy the Centaurans as well, and then put Passenger in place and destroy that Flux. Like, pardon me. It all makes sense. It all links up. It just isn't satisfying. And so that's where I think this episode is probably quite divisive. And I think for a lot of people, you know, it's great if you love it. Like, I'm really happy for you if you really enjoyed it and felt like it was a great conclusion to the series. Like, I can totally see, as I say, it works. Like, it's not like there's a fundamental plot holes in it. It's completely flawed. The logic doesn't work or whatever. Sure, there's some shortcuts. But it's not like it's completely nonsensical. It makes sense. I just don't feel like we have fun watching it as an audience. We feel like we've really achieved anything, you know, been satisfied as an audience by watching this episode. I said from the start of the series, well before this series began, that I always thought the finale would be what this series kind of died or lived on, because it was going to be one whole story and a narrative to run through the whole series, and so it was always going to be most important about how they wrapped it up, as to whether seeing all the setup and build up through the episode was going to be, you know, a fun watch again and rewatch and whatever, and whether that would really work would be based on the finale and how that played out. And I think that it was proved it here. Like, by the book it worked, but it isn't fun, and I think that's it's just such a shame that the finale just didn't quite hit. It didn't quite work in the way I was hoping it would. As is really well explained by Andrew Ellard, as I mentioned in his tweet notes earlier, he just talks about how it's so heavily plot and there's no real story and there's no real emotion in this episode at all. Like, that's so much of what Chris Chibnall's writing has been about. There's often been a lot of plot. Obviously, exposition is, you know, the buzzword of the Chris Chibnall era, and there's a shed load of it in this episode. We get the Doctor down in the Williamson tunnels explaining the Centaurans' plan to the audience rather than showing anything happening, and then getting rid of Williamson because his moment's done without any real sort of feeling a need. And Williamson feels like a bit of a wasted character again as well. Like, sure, we needed to bring the tunnels in to help save Yaz and Dan, and do the tunnels really serve any other ultimate purpose to the stories? Like, do they? I don't think they really do. Like, they don't really make any other difference, apart from another place to put the Grand Serpent as well. Like, they don't influence the whole Centauran's plan or anything. Like, there's none of it there. And then Williamson is just, as soon as he's kind of explained what he did and, you know, done his bit, that was like, goodbye, get on. Now, you need to go back to your own time to protect you. You're too important. It's like, we're done with you. Go home. Get off the screen. We don't need you anymore. And so after dumping him in various episodes, I can kind of understand why, because you're setting up all these different doors to different places. So let's show him in weird different places, because then that all, you know, all comes together and makes sense. But ultimately, he doesn't feel like an important enough character to justify that. But yeah, I kind of went off a bit of a tangent there. But as I was saying, the fact that this story is so much plot and not story and lacking emotion, it just feels like all these characters, they don't, we get Vinder and Belle, they turn up, they get their moment back together again, and then that's it. They're just kind of off. They save the universe, and then they go off with Carvanista, and it's all fun, cool, great, love it. Like we spent the whole series talking about how Vinder and Belle are going to be the Doctor's parents or Dan's parents or some ridiculously important characters to the series, because surely they had to be, because they have a big role in the series. And then it really was just setting up for them to have their moment meeting again when the Doctor saves her and saves Vinder and Diane in Passenger, and it means he can meet Belle again and find out that she's pregnant, and happy days, smiley face, let's have a kiss, it's great, cool. And then they go off in their separate fighter planes, help destroy those Antaran ships, and then join on with Carvanista to go off and leave, and that's it. And it just feels that this is where a lot of the problems lie. I think is it's all wrapped up. As I say, like, there's nothing, you can't fundamentally say there's anything wrong with them doing that. Okay, they've wrapped up their storyline, and now they're off with Carvanista. They're going to go and visit different planets. Fun. It makes sense. But it's not the satisfying conclusion you're looking for. It doesn't justify them being so heavily involved in all these previous episodes. Like, it doesn't really give anything there. So I just think that's a real shame. I mean, Carvanista gets a little bit more, because obviously we find out, quite significantly, that essentially he was one of the Ruth Doctor's companions way back when, or the future Doctor's companions back in the Temple of Atropos days and all of that, that he, was, the impression you get is they were really, really close back in those days. And then presumably when the Doctor decided to run away from the division, that meant, Carvanista felt sort of betrayed by the Doctor in that moment, and therefore got really angry and wanted to, as he says, put a universe between them. And then she turns up again with no memory of it, and that's why he was sort of so angry and wanted to kill her early in the series, because he knew exactly who she was, but couldn't say and couldn't go into it, because he has this implant in his mind that will get him killed if he talks about it, which, there's some good, interesting stuff there, and that was quite a nice emotional moment, and I felt that was one of the better things, that sort of revelation there. I thought that was really, really interesting. But then we find out that the whole of the Lipari have been destroyed, like every single one of his race. He's suddenly the last of the Lipari. Oh, where have we heard that before? Last of the Time Lords. And the Doctor's kind of like, oh, I'm so sorry, sad face. On we go, carry on with the plot now. Like, there's no dwelling on it, there's no emotional, there's one more moment where he's sitting a bit and looking a bit mopey in the TARDIS, and Dan and Yaz, I think, comment on it very, very briefly, and that's it. And it's just these sort of things which have to be done, and again, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with them, but you just, to really care and relate to these characters, you need more of an emotional response. You need more time to be dedicated to the connections to the characters, the relationships with the characters, and the emotion of it, where Chris just doesn't seem as interested in writing Doctor Who in that way. And we've seen that throughout the whole 3 series that he's done, is always the focus has been on plot and story. Not always very good plot and story, but that's been the focus, not on trying to develop the characters, develop their relationships, bring an emotional response as an audience, give us an emotional connection to those characters. It's just never really been there. Obviously, there's a load of characters in this story. Other characters, just to tick off a few from the list, is Kate Stewart turning up again. What a waste of time. She does nothing. She literally has no influence on any of the plot whatsoever. She's literally just there as a friendly, familiar face for the audience and a sort of front for the human resistance, but doesn't actually do anything. She doesn't influence anything. So, like, sure, I love seeing Kate Stewart. She's great. I enjoy her, and she's had good moments in previous stories, but she served no real purpose here. To be honest, I think it was a nice opportunity to kind of bring her back into it. And obviously, she says right in the last couple of lines when she's saying goodbye to the Doctor is, I hope we meet again. And it says, I hope we do too. It's been pretty strongly rumoured she's going to turn up in the Centenary special, that units are going to be back in full force in Jodie's last episode. So I'm sure that's maybe when she's going to get more of a big story, and this was almost like the initial opportunity to introduce her back into Doctor Who, kind of like we got with Captain Jack in the previous series, where he was kind of introduced in Fugitive and then had a proper episode in Revolution. So I can kind of see that, but yeah, fundamentally for this story, she is just a bit of a waste of time, unfortunately, which is a real shame because I love her character. I was very sad to see Jericho killed off in this episode. It was just one of those, like, he's such a fun character. I've really enjoyed seeing him these last 3 episodes. He's one, a real surprise of the series, I guess, in just being a really fun and enjoyable character. And like, I do, as much as it's sad, like it's a fitting moment, I guess, for him to have that sort of, you know, facing death in a great way and talking. And I think it's a really well shot scene, the way he sort of, you know, sort of stands up to that Centauran and says who he is and wants that moment. I think it works really, really effectively, and you really feel the emotion of that death. I think that's really, really good. I mean, some of it doesn't make much logical sense. He says, "I've lived more with you, Doctor, than I have in the last 20 years," and yet he spent 2 days with the Doctor. In reality, and he actually spent 3 years with Yaz, so don't know what's going on there. But I do fundamentally enjoy that as a real emotional moment. I just think it's a real shame, because I thought he was a great character, and I would really have liked to see him, quite frankly, stick around for the rest of Jodie's era, and as a companion alongside Yaz and Dan. I think it would have been really, really fun having someone from a slightly different time period, and I just think it could have really worked. So, again, Jericho and Claire didn't actually have. They were sort of a part of the plot rather than real characters in this episode, which is, again, they'd literally just used to put into a position to be in Centauran Psychic Command for Claire to be able to discover where the Final Flux event point is, and Jericho's just kind of there with her and sort of a character to play off against her. Like, that's really their fundamental roles in this story. Again, just part of the plot. And then we get the Grand Serpent. Now, the Grand Serpent, I like him. I think he's a great character. I love Craig Parkinson. I think he's brilliant. It was brilliant in Line of Duty. He's such an evil, slimy villain in Doctor Who. But there's just no point in him being here. Like, what difference does it make that he is in this episode? I thought he's got to have some more wider significance. There's got to be something else they're doing with him, because it's completely irrelevant. Ultimately, Centaurans could have just turned up without him doing anything. So the whole stuff of him infiltrating units to ultimately create a way for the Centaurans to come to the Earth, okay, it works, like it fits into the plot, sure, but it didn't need to happen. And then you're like, okay, well, the Centaurans are kind of the main threat, but there's also the posterior character of the Grand Serpent, this evil villain who's also here. And yet he doesn't do anything in this episode. He's just kind of hanging around while the Centaurans are fulfilling their plan, getting owned by the Doctor, or the multiple Doctors, and then meeting his final reckoning with Vinda, because we have to have the inevitable Vinda scene, because that's how, that's what happened with him in episode 3 when we first meet Grand Serpent. He ruins Vinda's career and forces him into exile. So let's reverse it and make Vinda put the Grand Serpent into exile. There you go. The plot is resolved. But is it good? Is it satisfying? Do we really care? No. And it just feels like a waste of a great villain that could have been the main character of another story. Like, he was really giving me Master vibes, or at least some connection to the Master, even if he isn't the Master. I really hope that we see the Grand Serpent again. Like, they've left it very open. He's just stuck on an asteroid. He's in exile. He seems a clever enough villain to find a way to get back from that at some point in the future. You never know. Maybe I'm underestimating Chris Chibnall. Actually, they're setting up to bring him back in one of the specials. Probably not the Dalek one, but maybe at some point. I don't know. But I just feel like there's a real waste of a character, and therefore a real waste of time in many ways in the previous episodes that we've seen. And fundamentally, it's just like the way that this episode sort of... The way Chris Chibnall decided to take this episode makes so much of the previous episode completely pointless. Like, the whole plot line with Yaz, Dan and Jericho in Survivors of the Flux, and them journeying across different places to try and find information out about sort of the end of the universe, and then the whole fetch your dog, and then them painting a message on the ground for Carvanista to see. That is just filler. There is no point to that whatsoever, because they just end up in the Williamson tunnels and escape that way. The whole point of the whole plot line of Yaz, Dan and Jericho is literally just to get them to the Williamson tunnels ultimately, and with some flashy filler alongside it in episode 5. There is no reason for anything else to happen in that. None of it is needed at all. And when it's a series full of so much stuff, I just feel like there's a better way time could have been taken up in episode 5. Even with the Unit stuff, it's cool, it's fun, but then Unit isn't actually in the finale, it's just Kate Stewart. And as I say, the Grand Serpent doesn't really have much purpose, and you don't need to go through Unit's history and have the Grand Serpent to be able to get the Centauran to turn back up on Earth. Sure, it works, but you don't need it. And it just feels, again, like we're filling the episode up with stuff that didn't necessarily need to be there. And then all the fundamental critical stuff of the previous episode, the Division, what is it? What the heck's going on? Tecteun. It's all just dropped in this episode. The Division barely even gets a mention because Tecteun's been destroyed. Swarm and Azure very much don't play big parts in this story. Like, Swarm and Azure, like, I guess I should talk a bit more in depth about them and their whole plan and all of that stuff. Like, their ultimate plan seems to be, as much as I can understand it, because they like to talk in riddles, all this stuff about space and time and the flux, and it gets a bit confusing to try and comprehend some of their dialogue because it's very sci-fi stuff. they want to punish the Doctor, I guess, and the universe, but particularly the Doctor for, the Division imprisoning them in the past. Well, I guess the Doctor kind of influenced that, as we saw in Once Upon a Time, by capturing them. And so they want to kind of map the flux and destruction universe, sort of, that she would feel the pain of that, and that they would keep rewinding it and replaying it over and over again, of the flux destroying the universe and the Doctor feeling that, to constantly feel the pain of the universe being destroyed and breaking apart. And that was kind of the fundamental plan. And then they were going to utilise the final flux event to ultimately destroy the rest of the universe, release time from the Temple of Atropos, because presumably the final flux event would destroy all of the Mori, which would release the force of time, which also has a physical embodiment that, for whatever reason, Swarm and Azure kind of worship almost like as a god. Time, the sort of embodiment of time, is a god to them. They're then going to take the Doctor to sacrifice to time, and they're going to kind of let time rule over the universe or something. I think that's where we're at, but it just is done. It feels really complex, sort of needlessly complex in some ways. And like, it's a plan, it's a solid enough plan. Like, it makes sense within the plot, it makes sense to them as characters to an extent. But the Ravagers don't do anything in this episode particularly. They just kind of stand around taunting the Doctor for a lot of it, and then take her to the Temple of Atropos, and then they realise, oh wait, the Doctor's actually been split into three, she's been solving all these problems, and now we've failed, and so time is just going to destroy them, I think. Or they said they were going to like ascend or something. They were, I think Azure was saying as they were disappearing. I don't really quite, is that just them being destroyed or what? I don't know. I don't really know where that kind of left us and ended. It was just a bit confusing in that sense. And then all this stuff we got introduced to in the previous episode about another universe, that Division exists outside the universe, and there's two different universes, or there's many universes, and there's all this talk about Universe 2 and going to a second universe, is completely dropped and forgotten about in this episode for some unfathomable reason. After it being seemingly so important and significant to episode 5, it's just non-existent in this episode. Like, the focus just shifts so much in this episode that it just seems to drop so much of what we had last week, which is just a real shame, because it feels like everything we were building up to just isn't there anymore. I would say I do fundamentally I'm happy with the kind of resolution of or the way that it plays out, with the Centaurans wanting to deceive cheat the Daleks and Cybermen and destroy them all, and that the Flux does that, but then the Doctor's obviously able to infiltrate it, and Carver needs to, with all the Lipari ships, to be able to then destroy all of the Centauran ships. Like, that'll work. That plot is quite nicely, it makes sense, it all fits together, it draws into it nicely. Then the utilisation of Passenger to absorb the last of the Flux energy, that's all really cool. I like that. It's a great shot. The CGI seeing all the Flux flowing to Passenger is great. You do kind of look at it and go, but wait, we have a device, a thing that's bigger on the inside that we actually care about, that we could have used, but no, we'll use Passenger instead, because why would it be interesting to let all the flux energy be absorbed into the TARDIS and maybe cause more damage to the TARDIS, which could lead into the TARDIS falling apart thing that's been sort of ongoing and I think will continue. That seemed obvious, but they didn't do it, so that's a little bit of a shame. But I can kind of see, they introduced Passenger for a reason, and it gets explained and explored, and that ultimately becomes the destruction of the flux in the end. What is confusing to me, and guys, if you're in the comments, please explain it. Like, I'm very ready to hear what you guys have to say about it. The flux. So, is the universe mostly destroyed still, and the Doctor's just kind of ignoring that fact? Or did it actually get reset? Or, like, when Swarm and Azure were explaining about this whole, we're going to play it over and over again, the flux is going to we're going to reverse it and have it happen again so you can feel the pain of it over and over. Does that mean that we got caught up in a moment where they'd reversed the flux, or was it all just theoretical, or was it only the Doctor feeling it rather than how it actually happens in the universe? I didn't fully understand or feel that was fully explained. I didn't feel like there was any definition and defined sort of explanation as to the universe still existing or not, or being mostly destroyed or not. I think it's mostly destroyed, but I didn't feel like that was well explained. And, that's a pretty massive thing if that is the case as well. Sure, the Earth is fine, and we don't go off-world enough to even notice the universe is destroyed, probably. But if it is, I hope that's something that's picked up on in episodes down the line, because it's a pretty major thing that seemed to be, it's the title of the hecking series, and yet I felt like it wasn't clear how that all ended. Sure, we saw the moment that the final flux energy is absorbed, and therefore the flux is over, but the repercussions of it just aren't are left open to interpretation. That really confused me. So I'm coming towards the end of all my thoughts. I felt it's been a very negative video, and I'm sorry, guys. I just really didn't enjoy this episode. I'll end on one of the things I did really enjoy, which was right towards the end of this episode, where we saw the Doctor and Yaz finally have a proper conversation. The Doctor finally realising how badly she's treated Yaz, frankly, for the last couple of series, really, since that she's been constantly not telling her anything. And, you know, has finally kind of come to that realization of that's really not a way to treat a friend. It's nice to see Yaz not just go, oh, it's okay, Doctor. She's actually like, no, you're why are you doing that? That's horrible. Like, sort yourself out. Like, be nice to me, basically. And, you know, that's a really nice emotive moment. It's one of the better sort of emotional scenes written by Chris that seems so lacking in a lot of the episodes that we see. So it's a really nice moment to have that. Obviously, it's a bit broken up by Dan there, which is a bit of fun. And then the Doctor's, you know, final decision of whether she's going to take the fob watch. And I've kind of discussed that all before. But yeah, the stuff with the Doctor and Yaz right at the end of this episode, I really fundamentally enjoyed that. And I think that you know, is a bit more of a narrative that we're building up there. But I also don't, you know, it's pining for a sort of a relationship, a romantic relationship between the two of them, but that's not going to happen. And so it does play into, are they just baiting this again as well, baiting some sort of romance that is never going to happen? I don't know, but I like the emotion of that scene. I'm just not sure where it's going to go and if it's really going to go where maybe the audience wants it to. So I think, guys, I will leave it there. I'm sure there's some bits of this episode I haven't completely addressed, and I'm sorry if there's anything I've forgotten. I've tried my best to get all these thoughts out there. Yeah, The Vanquishers, it's not the worst episode of Doctor Who ever by any means. It's not a bad episode. It does what it needs to do to wrap up the series, and that's good. Like, I'm happy with that. You know, you can say there's a conclusion there to pretty much, you know, 90% of the plot lines that have been running through the series, and that's fair enough to be expected from a series of this length and complexity. But did I enjoy it as a watch? Unfortunately, not really, and so I think it's the weakest episode of the series. It's a real shame for Doctor Who Flux to end on such a disappointing note. And yeah, it just leaves me feeling a bit sort of deflated, I think. It's the only way I can describe it at the end of the series. I kind of got to the end of my first watch of the episode, and I was just like, that's it. It's over, and it's a little bit disappointing, and I can't help but have that feeling. So yeah, guys, please, I really, really am interested to hear your full detailed perspectives in the comments below. Like, if you want to write paragraphs about it, I will read them. Or if you just want to write a couple of sentences about how it's great, then feel free. I really, really want to hear your comments and your discussion about it, because, you know, my opinion's been quite negative, and I'm sorry if this has been a bit of a negative video, but I just really felt I need to get these thoughts, you know, and perspective out in a bit more depth about the episode itself. But that's about it for this video, guys. Please do that like button and that subscribe button. There will be more videos to come. I'll still be doing the soundtrack to The Vanquishers. I'm hoping to have another couple of discussion videos about Doctor Who Flux as a whole as well. Megan Reacts, the final 2 episodes of Megan Reacts will be coming in the near future as well, plus some other Christmassy related videos as we head that way. And of course, when Eve of the Daleks comes around, there'll also be some videos around that as well. But until then, that's about it for this video, guys, and I will see you again very, very soon for a brand new one. But until then, it's goodbye.